Your soulmate was on a dinner date last night, and shockingly, their date wasn't what anyone expected. Don't skip. Listen carefully. This message is for you because last night your soulmate experienced something they never imagined would leave such a lasting impression on their heart. The evening wasn't planned months in advance. There was no dramatic beginning, no extraordinary announcement, no obvious sign that anything memorable was about to happen. To everyone else, it looked like an ordinary dinner. Just another evening, just another conversation, just another meal. But sometimes the most meaningful moments arrive wearing the disguise of ordinary life. And listen to this. The day had been long. Your soulmate had spent hours focused on responsibilities, answering messages, completing tasks, thinking about tomorrow before today had even ended. Like so many people, they had become caught in the rhythm of everyday life. Busy, focused, distracted. The hours seemed to disappear one after another. Nothing felt unusual. Nothing suggested the evening would become unforgettable. Because your heart needs this right now. Because life's biggest emotional moments often begin on the most ordinary days. Your soulmate had no idea they were walking toward one of those moments. As the afternoon slowly faded into evening, an unexpected invitation appeared. It wasn't extravagant. It wasn't mysterious. It wasn't surrounded by excitement. It was simple, a friendly invitation to share dinner. For a brief moment, they almost declined. The couch at home sounded comfortable. The day had been exhausting. They thought about sending a polite message saying maybe another time. But something deep inside whispered one quiet word. Go. It wasn't loud. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't dramatic. It was simply peaceful. Sometimes the quietest voice carries the greatest wisdom. So they accepted, without realizing it. They had just stepped into a moment that would quietly reshape the way they viewed life. As they prepared to leave, everything felt completely normal. They chose comfortable clothes, looked in the mirror, straightened a few things, smiled softly, locked the door behind them. The evening air felt fresh. The sky glowed with the final colors of sunset. People hurried home after work. Cars moved steadily through the streets. Children laughed in the distance. Nothing suggested that this ordinary evening would become unforgettable. When they finally arrived, the restaurant felt warm and welcoming. Golden lights reflected across polished tables. Soft music floated gently through the room. Families laughed together. Friends shared stories. Couples enjoyed quiet conversations. The comforting smell of freshly prepared food filled the air. Everything felt peaceful. Nothing seemed extraordinary. The person waiting greeted your soulmate with a genuine smile. No awkwardness. No pressure. No expectations. Just kindness. They found their table, sat down, ordered drinks, and the conversation began. At first, they spoke about everyday things. Work, busy schedules, funny moments from the week, small frustrations, future plans, simple conversations that people have every single day. Everything felt easy, natural, comfortable, because genuine conversations rarely begin with life's biggest questions. They begin with ordinary words that slowly open extraordinary doors. As the appetizers arrived, something quietly shifted. The conversation became slower, more thoughtful. Instead of discussing routines, they began speaking about people, about kindness, about forgiveness, about the unexpected moments that changed someone's life forever. One story led naturally into another. Every answer created another question. Time quietly disappeared. Your soulmate noticed they weren't checking their phone anymore. They weren't thinking about tomorrow. They weren't worrying about unfinished tasks. They were completely present, listening, thinking, feeling, for perhaps the first time in weeks. Then something happened that surprised them. The person across the table asked, "What do you think people remember most about someone?" The question lingered. Your soulmate didn't answer immediately. At first they thought about success, achievements, recognition, accomplishments. But the longer they reflected, the less satisfying those answers became. Finally, they smiled gently and replied, "I think people remember how someone made them feel." Silence followed. Not uncomfortable silence. Peaceful silence. The kind that appears when two people recognize a truth that needs no explanation. That single sentence changed the direction of the evening. The discussion became even deeper. They spoke about old friends, teachers who encouraged them, family members whose quiet love never asked for recognition, strangers whose kindness lasted only seconds but remained unforgettable for years. Each story reminded your soulmate that the greatest influence people have is often invisible, not through wealth, not through fame, not through status, but through compassion, understanding, patience, and simple acts of kindness. As the main course arrived, neither person seemed interested in rushing. The food was delicious. The atmosphere remained peaceful, yet somehow the conversation had become more satisfying than the meal itself. Your soulmate looked around the restaurant. Every table held another story. Parents celebrating birthdays, friends laughing together, someone quietly reading while eating alone, an elderly couple smiling at one another without speaking. Every person carried unseen dreams, unspoken worries, hidden victories, private heartbreaks, and suddenly your soulmate realized something beautiful. Every human being is fighting battles that nobody else can fully see. That realization filled their heart with compassion. The evening continued. More stories were shared. More laughter followed. Then another sentence quietly settled into the conversation. Sometimes the people who change our lives the most never realized they did. Those words stayed with your soulmate. Again, and again, and again, faces from the past began returning. People who had offered encouragement. People who believed in them during difficult seasons. People who spoke hope into their life when they had almost given up. Most of those people probably had no idea how deeply their kindness had mattered. Your soulmate suddenly felt overwhelmed with gratitude. Not because life had been perfect, but because they realized they had never walked alone. Someone had always appeared exactly when encouragement was needed most. As dessert arrived, neither person wanted the evening to end. The conversation had become peaceful, honest, refreshing. For a little while, the noise of the outside world disappeared completely. And if this message is touching your heart, I want you to pause for just a second. Comment 111 below. Let that number be your reminder to appreciate the people who have quietly shaped your life. Someone may have changed your story without ever knowing it. And perhaps you have done the same for someone else. Little did your soulmate know, the most important realization of the entire evening had not happened yet. It was waiting for them after they walked out of the restaurant doors, and that realization would stay with them for the rest of their life. As your soulmate stepped outside the restaurant, they expected the evening to end there. The meal was finished. The conversation had ended. The chairs had been pushed back. The lights of the restaurant slowly faded behind them. By every ordinary measure, the night was over. But sometimes, the most important part of an evening begins only after the goodbye. The cool night air greeted them gently. A soft breeze moved through the quiet streets. The city was beginning to slow down. Traffic had become lighter. Store windows reflected warm golden lights onto the sidewalks. The stars slowly appeared overhead. Everything looked exactly the same as it had a few hours earlier. Yet something inside your soulmate had completely changed. Because your heart needs this right now. Because sometimes the world remains exactly the same while our heart quietly becomes different. Instead of calling a taxi, instead of rushing home, they decided to walk. No destination, no schedule, just one slow step after another. Each step seemed to slow their thoughts. For once they weren't thinking about tomorrow. They weren't replaying unfinished work. They weren't worrying about problems waiting at home. Their mind had become unusually peaceful. The conversation from dinner quietly replayed itself. Not every sentence, not every story, only the moments that carried unexpected meaning. The pauses, the smiles, the thoughtful questions, the quiet honesty. Those moments seemed to grow stronger the further they walked. Because your heart needs this right now. Because the conversations that change us rarely leave us immediately. They stay with us. They continue speaking long after the voices become silent. As your soulmate crossed a small bridge overlooking the water, they stopped for a moment. The reflection of the city lights danced across the river. The surface looked calm, peaceful, almost effortless. Without realizing it, they whispered something to themselves. "I've been moving too fast." Those words surprised them. No one else heard them. Yet somehow they felt completely true. For months, perhaps even years, life had become a race. Wake up, work, responsibilities, deadlines, messages, appointments, sleep, repeat. There had been very little time to simply exist. Very little time to appreciate. Very little time to notice the people quietly walking beside them. Tonight reminded them of something they had almost forgotten. Life is not only about reaching destinations. It is also about noticing the people who walk beside us while we travel. Because your heart needs this right now. Because sometimes we spend so much time chasing tomorrow that we forget to experience today. The walk continued. The streets became quieter. A small cafe was closing for the night. A couple laughed together while sharing an umbrella. An elderly man slowly walked his dog beneath the streetlights. Someone sat alone on a park bench, simply watching the sky. Each person seemed to carry their own invisible story. Your soulmate suddenly wondered how many lives had crossed their own without them fully appreciating it. How many people had quietly encouraged them? How many smiles had they forgotten? How many acts of kindness had gone unnoticed because they had simply been too busy? The questions didn't create sadness. They created gratitude. A deep gratitude. One that settled gently into their heart. Then another memory returned. Years ago, someone had once told them, "Never underestimate the value of making someone feel seen." At the time, it sounded like nice advice. Tonight, it sounded like wisdom. Your soulmate realized that every meaningful relationship begins the same way. Someone feels seen. Someone feels heard. Someone feels understood. Not because another person solved all their problems, but because someone simply took the time to care. Because your heart needs this right now. Because being understood is one of the greatest gifts anyone can receive. As they continued walking, another realization quietly appeared. The dinner hadn't changed their circumstances. Nothing dramatic had happened. No miracle. No shocking announcement. No life-altering event. Yet somehow, everything felt different. Because perspective had changed. And when perspective changes, life changes with it. They smiled without even realizing it. Not because everything was perfect, but because peace had quietly replaced pressure. For the first time in a long while, their heart felt lighter. Then something unexpected happened. Their phone vibrated. A simple message appeared. It wasn't from the person they had dinner with. It was from someone they hadn't spoken to in months. The message simply said, "I don't know why, but I was thinking about you tonight. I hope you're doing well." Your soulmate stared at the screen, then smiled again. The timing felt strangely beautiful, as if life itself was gently reminding them that meaningful connections never completely disappear. Sometimes they simply wait for the right moment to be remembered. Because your heart needs this right now. Because kindness has a way of returning when we least expect it. If you've ever received a message exactly when you needed it, comment 222 below. Let that number remind you that meaningful connections often return when the timing is right. Your soulmate kept walking. The city had almost fallen completely silent now. They reached a small park and decided to sit on a nearby bench. No music, no distractions, only silence. For several minutes, they simply breathed, looking at the stars, listening to the wind moving through the trees. And suddenly another truth quietly settled into their heart. The greatest relationships are not built through expensive gifts, not through dramatic speeches, not through perfect moments. They are built through consistency, through listening, through patience, through showing up again and again. That realization felt more valuable than anything discussed over dinner. Because your heart needs this right now. Because lasting love grows slowly. One conversation, one kind word, one thoughtful moment at a time. As they finally stood to continue walking home, they had no idea the evening had already begun changing the kind of person they wanted to become. And by the time they reached their front door, one quiet promise had already formed inside their heart. A promise that would shape every meaningful relationship they built from that day forward. And that promise would become the most unforgettable part of the entire evening. By the time your soulmate unlocked the front door, the world outside had become completely quiet. The streets had emptied. The city lights glowed softly through the windows. Everything looked peaceful, ordinary, familiar, yet something inside them no longer felt ordinary. They placed their keys on the table, took off their jacket, poured themselves a glass of water, then stood silently for a moment. Not because they were tired, but because they didn't want the feeling from the evening to disappear. Because your heart needs this right now. Because sometimes we recognize that a simple moment deserves to be remembered before life begins moving again. They walked toward the living room. The television remained off. The phone stayed face down. For once, silence felt comforting instead of lonely. They sat beside the window and looked out across the sleeping city. 1,000 lights stretched across the distance. Behind every light was another story, another family, another dream, another person wondering if tomorrow might somehow be different. That thought made them smile, because they suddenly realized something. Everyone is quietly searching for the same things: peace, understanding, belonging, someone who truly listens, someone who stays. Because your heart needs this right now. By the time your soulmate unlocked the front door, the world outside had become completely quiet. The streets had emptied. The city lights glowed softly through the windows. Everything looked peaceful, ordinary, familiar, yet something inside them no longer felt ordinary. They placed their keys on the table, took off their jacket, poured themselves a glass of water, then stood silently for a moment. Not because they were tired, but because they didn't want the feeling from the evening to disappear. Because your heart needs this right now. Because sometimes we recognize that a simple moment deserves to be remembered before life begins moving again. They walked toward the living room. The television remained off. The phone stayed face down. For once, silence felt comforting instead of lonely. They sat beside the window and looked out across the sleeping city. 1,000 lights stretched across the distance. Behind every light was another story, another family, another dream, another person wondering if tomorrow might somehow be different. That thought made them smile, because they suddenly realized something. Everyone is quietly searching for the same things: peace, understanding, belonging, someone who truly listens, someone who stays. Because your heart needs this right now. Because beneath all our differences, every heart longs to be understood. Without thinking, they picked up an old notebook from the shelf. Its pages were nearly empty. Months had passed since they had written anything. Life had simply become too busy. Tonight felt different. They opened to a blank page, held the pen for a moment, then slowly wrote, "Tonight reminded me who I want to become." They stopped writing. Read the sentence again. Something about those words felt deeply personal. It wasn't about the dinner. It wasn't about the restaurant. It wasn't even about the person they met. It was about themselves. Because your heart needs this right now. Because sometimes another person doesn't change our life. They simply remind us of the person we were always capable of becoming. Your soulmate continued writing. "I want to become someone who listens before speaking. I want to become someone who notices small acts of kindness. I want to appreciate people while they are still here. I want to stop assuming there will always be another opportunity to say thank you." Each sentence brought unexpected peace. The notebook slowly became more than paper. It became a conversation with their own heart. Then another memory quietly surfaced. Years earlier, someone had once thanked them for something they couldn't even remember doing. It had only been a small encouragement, a few simple words. Yet that person had said, "You changed my entire week." At the time, your soulmate had smiled politely. Tonight, they finally understood. We rarely know the impact our kindness has. One encouraging sentence, one smile, one conversation, one act of patience. Sometimes that's all it takes to change someone's direction. Because your heart needs this right now. Because the smallest moments often carry the greatest influence. As midnight drew closer, they closed the notebook, walked into the kitchen, made themselves a warm drink. The house remained completely silent. No noise, no distractions, only peaceful reflection. Their thoughts returned once again to the question from dinner. What do people remember most? Earlier that evening they had answered. They remember how someone made them feel. Now that answer felt even deeper. People rarely remember perfect conversations. They remember sincere ones. People rarely remember expensive gifts. They remember genuine kindness. People rarely remember flawless people. They remember those who made them feel safe enough to be themselves. That truth settled gently into their heart. Because your heart needs this right now. Because authenticity leaves a deeper mark than perfection ever could. Your soulmate suddenly laughed softly to themselves. It wasn't a loud laugh, just a quiet smile. They realized something almost funny. The dinner that looked ordinary from the outside had quietly become one of the most meaningful evenings they had experienced in years. Not because anything extraordinary happened, but because they had finally slowed down enough to notice what had always mattered. Relationships, presence, gratitude, compassion, those things had always been there. Life had simply been moving too fast to see them clearly. As they prepared for bed, they stood once more beside the bedroom window. The stars still filled the sky. A gentle breeze moved the nearby trees. The city seemed almost asleep. Then another thought appeared, one they had never considered before. What if every person I meet is carrying a burden I cannot see? The question immediately changed the way they viewed everyone. The impatient cashier, the quiet neighbor, the tired coworker, the stranger walking alone. Everyone was carrying something invisible. Everyone was hoping for kindness. Everyone was silently fighting battles unknown to others. Your soulmate made another quiet promise. I will choose compassion before judgment. Those words felt right. Not because they sounded beautiful, but because they felt true. Because your heart needs this right now. Because compassion begins the moment we stop assuming we know someone else's story. Before turning off the bedside lamp, they reached for the notebook one final time. This time they wrote only one sentence. One ordinary evening reminded me that extraordinary people are recognized by the peace they leave behind. They stared at those words, closed the notebook, placed it carefully beside the bed, then finally turned off the light. The room became dark, peaceful, still, yet their mind continued reflecting, not with anxiety, not with regret, but with gratitude, for the conversation, for the laughter, for the unexpected wisdom, for the reminder that life isn't waiting somewhere in the future. Life is happening now, in quiet dinners, in honest conversations, in unexpected moments, in people who simply choose to care. Because your heart needs this right now. Because tomorrow is built by the moments we choose to value today. If this message has reminded you to appreciate someone before it's too late, comment 333 below. Let that number remind you to never postpone gratitude. Because your soulmate was about to discover that the greatest lesson from that dinner wasn't finished yet. The following morning, something completely unexpected was waiting for them, and it would make them realize that the previous evening had been preparing their heart for a lesson even greater than they could have imagined. The following morning arrived quietly. Sunlight slowly filled the room. The same walls, the same familiar routine. Yet your soulmate woke up feeling different. Not because life had suddenly changed overnight, but because something inside them had. The dinner was over. The conversations had ended. The restaurant was now only a memory. Yet the feeling remained. Because your heart needs this right now. Because truly meaningful moments never end when the event is over. They continue changing us long afterward. Your soulmate lay still for a few moments. Normally, the first thing they reached for was their phone. Messages, notifications, news, the endless noise of another busy day. But today was different. Instead, they simply looked out the window. The morning sky looked peaceful. Birds moved between the trees. People were already beginning their daily routines. Life continued exactly as it always had. Yet for the first time in a long while, they didn't feel rushed. And listen to this. As they prepared breakfast, the conversation from the previous night quietly returned. Not every word, not every detail, just one sentence. People remember how someone made them feel. Those words seemed even more powerful in the quietness of the morning. Because your heart needs this right now. Because some truths become clearer after we've had time to sleep on them. Your soulmate carried that sentence with them throughout the day. As they stepped outside, something unexpected happened. They noticed people they normally walked past without thinking. The elderly neighbor slowly watering flowers. The delivery driver smiling as he greeted strangers. The young mother holding her child's hand while crossing the street. None of these moments were extraordinary, yet suddenly, they felt meaningful. Because your heart needs this right now. Because when our perspective changes, the ordinary begins revealing extraordinary beauty. Your soulmate smiled quietly. Then another realization appeared. Perhaps life had never been lacking beautiful moments. Perhaps they had simply been moving too quickly to notice them. That thought stayed with them all morning. At work, something else happened. A coworker looked unusually tired. Normally your soulmate would have continued walking. Busy, focused, thinking about responsibilities. But today they stopped. "Are you okay?" It was only 4 simple words. The coworker looked surprised, then smiled. "I've had a difficult week." For the next few minutes, they simply listened. No advice, no interruptions, just listening. When the conversation ended, the coworker quietly said, "Thank you. I really needed someone to ask." Those words touched your soulmate deeply. Because your heart needs this right now. Because sometimes people aren't waiting for perfect solutions. They're simply waiting for someone who genuinely cares. The rest of the day unfolded normally. Emails, meetings, responsibilities. Yet everything felt slightly different. Every interaction carried more meaning. Every conversation deserved more attention. Your soulmate realized that presence changes everything. And listen to this. Later that afternoon, while organizing old papers at home, a folded photograph slipped from inside a notebook. It showed people they hadn't seen in years. Friends, family, smiling together. Immediately, another memory returned. One of those people had always encouraged everyone around them. Always listened. Always believed the best in others. Yet your soulmate realized something heartbreaking. They had never truly thanked them. Life had simply moved too quickly. That realization lingered. Not with regret, but with gratitude. Because your heart needs this right now. Because appreciation becomes more meaningful when we express it while we still can. Without hesitation, your soulmate picked up the phone. They sent a simple message. "I was thinking about you today. Thank you for all the kindness you've shown me over the years. I don't think I've ever told you how much it meant." The reply arrived only minutes later. It simply said, "You have no idea how much I needed to read that today." Your soulmate stared at the screen. A smile slowly appeared, not because they had done something extraordinary, but because they had finally acted on what their heart already knew. Kindness should never be delayed. And listen to this. As evening approached again, almost 24 hours after the dinner, your soulmate realized something remarkable. The dinner itself had lasted only a few hours, yet its influence continued growing. It had changed conversations, changed priorities, changed awareness, changed perspective. That is the true power of meaningful moments. Because your heart needs this right now. Because real transformation rarely happens all at once. It grows quietly, one decision at a time, one conversation at a time, one act of kindness at a time. Before sunset, your soulmate returned once again to the notebook beside their bed. This time they wrote another promise. "I will stop waiting for life to become extraordinary before I begin appreciating it." Then another. "I will tell people they matter while they can still hear the words." Then another. "I will never underestimate the power of one sincere conversation." As they finished writing, a deep sense of peace settled over them. Not because everything in life had become perfect, but because they finally understood what the dinner had truly been teaching them. The greatest relationships, the greatest memories, and the greatest transformations are built through small moments repeated consistently over time. Because your heart needs this right now. Because greatness is rarely created through one spectacular event. It is created through thousands of ordinary moments, filled with extraordinary sincerity. If you've stayed with this message this far, comment 444 below. Let that number remind you to appreciate someone today, instead of waiting for tomorrow. Because your soulmate was about to receive one final surprise. A realization that would connect every lesson. from the dinner into one unforgettable truth. And that final lesson would remain with them for the rest of their life. And listen to this. That night, before falling asleep, your soulmate stood quietly beside the window. The city lights stretched into the distance. Cars moved through the streets. People continued living their own stories. Nothing outside seemed unusual, yet inside, everything had changed. Because your heart needs this right now. Because the greatest changes are often invisible. They happen quietly, one realization at a time, one honest moment at a time, one decision at a time. Your soulmate closed their eyes for a moment, not to escape the world, but to appreciate it. The dinner was over. The conversations had ended. The walk home had become a memory, yet the lessons remained alive. And listen to this. For the first time in a very long while, they stopped asking, "What am I missing?" Instead, they began asking, "What have I already been blessed with that I haven't fully appreciated?" That single question changed everything. Because your heart needs this right now. Because gratitude changes the way we experience the same life we've always had. Suddenly, faces came into their mind. Parents, friends, old classmates, neighbors, co-workers, people who had quietly encouraged them, people who had stayed during difficult seasons, people whose kindness had become part of who they were. Many of them had probably forgotten those moments. Your soulmate never had. And listen to this. They realized something beautiful. The people who change our lives the most rarely know they've done it. They aren't trying to become unforgettable. They simply choose kindness. Again, and again, and again. Because your heart needs this right now. Because your smallest act of kindness may become someone else's greatest memory. Your soulmate understood that more deeply than ever before. Then another thought appeared. Perhaps, somewhere, without realizing it, they had also changed someone else's life. Maybe through one encouraging conversation, one smile, one act of patience, one moment when they chose compassion instead of judgment. That possibility filled their heart with hope. Because your heart needs this right now. Because goodness never truly disappears. It continues moving from one heart to another, even when we never see the results. And listen to this. As they reflected on the dinner one final time, they finally understood the shocking truth. The date wasn't unforgettable because of who sat across the table. It wasn't unforgettable because of expensive food. It wasn't unforgettable because of romance. The dinner became unforgettable because it reminded your soulmate who they truly wanted to become. A person who listens. A person who appreciates. A person who notices. A person who slows down. A person who leaves every conversation making others feel seen. Because your heart needs this right now. Because becoming the right person is often more important than searching for the right person. That realization brought peace unlike anything they had felt in a long time. And listen to this. The following days unfolded differently. Not dramatically, quietly. Your soulmate smiled more often, listened more carefully, expressed gratitude more freely, stopped rushing conversations, stopped assuming tomorrow would always come. Every interaction became more intentional because they now understood something priceless. Life is happening now, not someday, not after success, not after everything becomes perfect. Now, because your heart needs this right now, because the present moment is where our greatest memories are, quietly being created. Then something unexpected happened. Several days later, someone looked at your soulmate and said, "You seem different lately, more peaceful, more present." Your soulmate smiled. They couldn't fully explain why. How could they? How do you explain that one ordinary dinner quietly changed the way you see life? Some lessons cannot be taught. They can only be experienced. And listen to this. That evening, they opened the notebook one final time. Below every promise they had written, they added one last sentence. Never become so busy building a life that you forget to truly live it. They stared at those words, then gently closed the notebook. Not because the journey was over, but because a new one had begun. A journey built on gratitude, presence, compassion, honesty, and genuine connection. Because your heart needs this right now. Because every meaningful journey begins with one simple decision. The decision to become more aware, more thankful, more loving, more present. Then one final realization settled into their heart. Perhaps the soulmate everyone spends years searching for isn't simply someone who changes your future. Perhaps there's someone who awakens the very best version of you. Someone whose presence reminds you of who you've always wanted to become. Someone who inspires you to live differently, to love differently, to appreciate differently, to slow down enough to notice life's quiet miracles. Because your heart needs this right now. Because the greatest relationships don't only bring happiness. They bring growth. They bring healing. They bring perspective. They remind us what truly matters. And listen carefully. If this message found you today, maybe it wasn't only about your soulmate. Maybe it was also about you. Maybe today is your opportunity to call someone you've been meaning to thank, to forgive someone, to encourage someone, or simply to slow down long enough to notice the beauty already surrounding you. Sometimes, one conversation changes a heart. Sometimes, one act of kindness changes a life. And sometimes, one ordinary evening becomes the beginning of an extraordinary future. If you've stayed until the very end, I want you to leave one final comment. Comment 777. If you believe the smallest moments often become the biggest blessings, I'd love to read your story. What is one simple conversation, one unexpected act of kindness, or one ordinary moment that quietly changed your life forever? Share it below. Someone reading your comment may receive exactly the encouragement they need today. Thank you for spending this time with me. May your heart always recognize kindness before it becomes a memory. May you treasure the people who truly matter while they are still beside you. May your conversations bring peace. May your presence bring comfort. And may every ordinary day reveal extraordinary blessings that were quietly waiting to be noticed all along. Take care of yourself. Keep choosing kindness. Keep appreciating the people who make your life brighter. And remember, sometimes the most unforgettable dinner is the one that quietly teaches you how to live.